Welcome to Last First Date Radio, featuring interviews with experts in dating, relating, and mating in midlife. And now, here's your host, Sandy Weiner.
This is episode number 461 with Ray and Jean Kadkhodaian, How Porn Damages Relationships. Hi, everybody. I'm Sandy Weiner, and welcome back to Last First Date Radio, where we believe it is never too late to fall madly in love. And if you want to fall more in love with yourself first and then with your last first date, I wrote a book just for you, and it's called Becoming a Woman of Value, How to Thrive in Life and Love. And it's filled with 30 tips, stories, exercises designed to help you step more fully into your value and live the life that you want. You can find it now on Amazon, Kindle, or paperback. And this week's tip from the book is step number 23, be aware of your tone. We often think that we're saying something in a nice way because we're not yelling and we're not saying it in an acerbic way, but a lot of times our tone says a different story. And so my kids used to always say, Mom, your tone of voice doesn't sound very good. And so I didn't like it when they called me on it, when I was trying to call them on something, but they were right. I often had a lot of anger underneath the surface. And so if you have this issue, I challenge you to just calm yourself down before you talk, because when you're having an important conversation, your tone is a big part of your communication. And before I bring our guests on, I want to just invite anybody who's not yet a member of my Facebook group to join us. It's called Your Last First Date, and it is a group for support, positive support. It is a monitored group, as opposed to many groups for single women, which are just a cesspool of complaints and victim mindset. This is not what we do. I post in there regularly, as my monitors do, and you'll get all the latest tips and advice and support in that group. So join us at Your Last First Date. And now for my guests. Power couple Dr. Ray and Jean Kadkhodaian, are co-founders of a counseling center in the Chicago area and co-founders of a unique approach to helping couples have amazing relationships. It's called Couples Synergy. They've worked with thousands of couples for over 20 years. They both have master's degrees in clinical psychology, and Dr. Ray has an additional doctorate, as if that wasn't enough, in clinical psychology. They also have a podcast of their own called Couples Synergy, Real Couples, Real Stories. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much for having us on the show.
It's exciting to cover this topic, as we have not talked about porn on this podcast with all these episodes, almost 500, and we haven't covered this topic. So let's get into it. First, I'd like to know, what are the most adverse effects of porn on long-term relationships?
Before we get into that, I have to say that the psychological field does not recognize porn addiction or sex addiction as an actual diagnosis. It is not covered in the DSM. And there is a lot of controversial studies about porn and whether it is an actual addiction or whether it is actually something that affects relationships negatively. So a lot of the the work that we have done and the topic of porn and what we're going to be talking about is really anecdotal from a lot of the work that we have done with thousands of couples and seeing relationships, in all states.
Interesting.
If we want to talk about the top damaging thing that happens for couples, is that one person, and it's usually the man, gets so addicted to porn or uses porn so much that he no longer is interested or capable of having sexual relationship with his wife. And we've worked with couples who we see the man so full of shame, and by the time he gets caught again, the marriage ends, and it's just so painfully destructive.
As you mentioned, porn is so accessible. It is definitely accessible all over, and because it's so accessible, it has permeated into our relationships, into our lives. Sexualization, just in general, is something that's so pervasive, right? It has creeped into just normal TV viewing now. And so we're not really fully aware of how much it is actually impacting all of us, because relationships are so complicated and so complex, right? You started talking a little bit about tone in the beginning, and tone is something that is not necessarily, something that you can graph. It's not something tangible, right? And so the way that porn actually affects people is very much the same way. It kind of creeps into the relationships in many different ways that we're not really aware of. And so when we see couples come in, and they are suffering with, a sexless marriage, or they are not connected at all emotionally, they're not spending any time together. When we start diving deep into, their lack of sexual intimacy and emotional intimacy, we start to find that there are other distractions that are also part of their relationship, and porn being one of them.
Yeah.
At the age of 6, 26% of our 6-year-olds are being accidentally exposed to porn.
Ooh.
Yeah. And those early childhood experiences will impact them the rest of their lives. And I think, the question is really of desensitization. And so when you first see something, it's very shocking. And then the more you see it, the more you kind of numb out. And we were actually talking to a couple who works, their company is Tantra Nova, and they help people with sexual stuff. And Freddie, the guy, was saying that it actually deadens the nerves on the head of the penis. And so your body numbs up. And, for women, we're receptive. And so we need to become open in our heart center. And the male energy has to come up from the genitals up into the heart and over into the heart to have a true intimate experience. And for women, it then goes down into the genitals and makes this really lovely loop. And when there's pornography involved, it sort of just takes off like a rocket ship and is done. Like I always say, nobody watches those movies till the end. And so the female experience is in those movies is not very normal or real, what the women are going through in those experiences, or the men, And so woman's sexuality sort of like starts down here and slowly goes up, and a man's kind of goes whoop, and it's over. And a lot of women in their normal relationships, even when pornography is not involved, they have a difficult time changing this graph. And the graph is for men to come up and hold that energy and then meet over here to have, a really great sexual experience that's physical, emotional, and even spiritual. And so pornography only strips it right down to a physical experience that it's not a relationship experience. It's not between two people. It's each person in their own world by themselves.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. I mean, that and scary, the 6-year-old part, the fact that people get so addicted to porn, the fact that it's not in the list of addictions. There's just so many things. And I think, they used to be like you had to buy or rent a porn movie or subscribe to something, and now everybody can see it. And one of the things my son, who's 30, said to me recently was that it gives you an unrealistic, for him, it gives him an unrealistic expectation of what women's bodies would look like and the sexual acts that people would perform. The fact that men can last an hour on average in porn, which is not realistic. And I think there's a lot of compare and despair as well, like size, body image. Let's go there for a minute. Like the whole, these perfect bodies and these unrealistic expectations around physical. Tell us a little bit about that.
So the first thing that I want to let guys in on is that a woman's body is capable of forming to her partner's parts. So there is really no such thing as like the size issue. except for too big. We have seen people have physical wounds from too large of a penis, but a woman's body is capable of, like, having a baby and then shrinking back down. And so whoever your partner is that's where your body's going to conform to. And so I hope that gives men a little bit of confidence that what you have is perfect. It really is. And it's everything else around that, which is, I think, such an important thing to hear. And I think where the trouble comes in is when you're early in life and maybe you have multiple sexual partners, that is not going to be the case. That's going to, until you fit together as a couple, that can kind of change. In terms of a woman's body, and I find that really sad. And, as a woman myself at the age of 54, I remember being a girl and trying on my sister's bikini and thinking that my body looked very boyish and feeling really insecure about that. And now I look back at pictures and I'm like, what was I thinking? That's so ridiculous. And it is those images, if you think about our grandmothers, they only could compare themselves to the lady next door. And so there was just a natural idea of what this was. And, unfortunately, porn sort of only puts in your face right after puberty, right? 18-year-old to 20-something-year-old girls, unless you get into weird stuff, which happens if you, stay in that kind of stuff long. And so that idea that these really unformed, emotionally and spiritual girls at that stage of life, they don't know a lot about their sexuality. And at that stage of life, everything's very physical. The first time someone touches you or you're young, it's just like fireworks. And as you get older, it turns into something that has more depth and has more of an emotional component to it. And I can say at the age of 54, at the heaviest weight I've ever been in my life, I feel more beautiful than I ever have. I am more accepting of myself. I don't know if it's how much time we spend on camera. I have to see myself all the time, but what really changed it for me was when I turned 49, I decided to hike 1,000 miles, and I weighed 185 pounds at the time. And I was on the trail, and everything on the trail is so beautiful. And it could be this wonderful, huge tree, or it can be a fallen down tree that's decaying, or rocks or mushrooms or whatever. And I thought, everything on the trail is beautiful, and I'm on the trail too. So I must be beautiful too. And we have lost that, and we lock that inside of ourselves, which is a great pain for women. And none of us have the same body parts, and there will always be a variety of body parts. And that's the chase. And you can talk about this more for men, but they don't this is the ideal porn star, and that's the only porn star I want to watch, right?
Sexuality has been associated for many people with shame. And, for me, I learned about sex through the Catholic Church, which you can only imagine, what was taught there, right? And that is that if you have sex before marriage, you're going to hell, and so there's always this connection with shame. And so when we have, these supermodel people that are displaying sexual acts, and that is really this proliferation of what sex is supposed to be. And then you couple that with people who already have shame about sex, about their own bodies. Now it's just going to, amplify that amount of shame that they have about themselves. I mean, we have it enough with all the sexualization and ads and, that are going around and being put in our face all the time. And you think about Instagram perfect and how people look, perfect on Instagram, and how people try to look even more perfect. And so now when we couple that with the most intimate act that we can have with another human being, it amplifies, as I said, that shame that people may already have within themselves. And then when they're trying to connect with their partner, they become so much more disconnected because they can't get beyond their own, their own shame and their own what am I thinking about? The insecurities, right? To be able to connect with their partner and find that true acceptance within the relationship.
When we're born, we have needs that people don't really talk about. So I'm not really just talking about food, clothing, and shelter, but the needs of attention and belonging and acceptance and validation. And we know these are real needs because babies and studies they've done with monkeys, they've shown that if these needs don't get met, they actually die. But what's interesting is they've noticed this pattern of behaviors that human beings go through in order to get those needs met. And the very first one they do is they're coyish. And what we're talking about here is an infant. We're talking about an infant, and they're like, goo goo gaga, pick me. And this really came from Russia after the war, where there were so many orphan babies and not enough people to care for them. And so these babies had to compete, like, come and hold me, take care of me. And they weren't able to meet all these needs. And that coyishness was the first thing they noticed these babies would do. And for us as human beings, that turns into seduction. And so oftentimes when young people aren't getting a lot of those needs met in their families, that attention, that belonging, that acceptance, their body changes, and suddenly they're getting that attention from someone. And what they really want are those needs met. But what they're learning very young is that they have a trade-off, that they have to have sex in order to get those needs met. There's two other ones I'll get into really briefly. After coyishness is tantrum. So baby screams. And you see that in couples when there's an issue with their bonding. One of them often has a really big anger and jealousy issue. And then the third one is giving up, listlessness, before those babies died. And so this is a really big thing that happens in the early developmental stages of our sexuality. And for women, our biggest fear from men is that they'll kill us. And for men, their biggest fear from women is that we will reject them. And so pornography offers an endless supply of women who will not only not reject you, they want to show up and seduce you and please you, which is not normal in the world. It's supposed to be the opposite way, where a man's supposed to woo, especially in the beginning stages of a couple forming, the woman. And so that backwardsness, I think, makes young men in that place of like, why isn't she just falling all over me? Why do I have to work at this? It just shows up in porn.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the scariest part of it, is that porn is influencing generations and generations in the dating and coupling and courting procedures, right? That, normally you're supposed to learn one-on-one with an individual. Now you are being exposed to all of this unrealistic way of finding a mate. And so now all of these young boys and young generation are not really knowing how to connect with a person at a very genuine level.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's compounded by texting and not really communicating. Yeah. I teach a lot about communication because it's a lost art, and we have these quick connections, and a lot of times, especially as people get older, and I'm 65, so in my age range, there are a lot of people who just want to just sort of test drive. Let's see if you're still sexually active. I need to know right away. And there's no courting, and there's no getting to know you, and there's no connection. And it's like we're missing each other. We're just two ships passing in the night, and people are frustrated on both ends and don't know how to bridge that gap.
Yeah. And, when you talk about this instant world and the sexting, and, we see girls as young as like 13, making videos of themselves and sending it to their classmates. And our son, he's 22, he's like, this was a friend of mine, and I don't want to see that. And that's the thing, like we were talking about earlier, like when we were young, you had to like walk into a 7-Eleven and ask for the thing behind the counter, or go behind the curtain, or even drive over to a theater that shows movies like that. And now, even if you don't want to see that, even if you've chosen to not have that be part of your life, it for sure will be in your face almost every single day.
Yeah, you just type a website wrong and instantly, you'll be exposed to it. And even if you don't want to, and it's becoming more and more difficult to avoid being exposed to imagery like that.
Yeah, and we are so desensitized, like you said, and I've been watching Sex and the City replays, and it's fascinating to watch now as a dating and relationship coach, to go back with different eyes. I don't know if I ever really watched all of the episodes, but there is a whole storyline where one of the people, Charlotte, is married to Trey, and he won't have sex with her. They've been married for months, and then she catches him with a girly magazine, one of these like Playboy magazines, and he's masturbating to this magazine. And she's like, wait a minute, he can do that, but he can't be with me. They finally figure out how to have sex, and then it becomes insane sex, like totally everywhere all the time. But it brings up a lot of these issues, and this is mainstream TV that's available now, streaming everywhere. The people have sex on screen, on Netflix, on Amazon Prime. I mean, you don't have to even search for porn to see sex, and to see sex in ways that are not often healthy. And so, what are the role models that kids are growing up with? And that sexualizing of the clothing, and it's really, that's one of the scariest things for me, is to see these little girls who are dressed in provocative clothes, in provocative positions, and it's a way to get attention. It really is sad. I mean, so any words of wisdom about any of that?
It is very sad. You're right. And there are actually sites where teenagers and young women are actually making a lot of money getting attention for being scantily clad, or even, doing whatever, that is provocative. And the adults that should be teaching their kids about appropriate sexual connection with another human being, they are caught up in it too. And so, because technology is moving so fast, we are not able to catch up with it to even ask the question on whether this is appropriate or not, or what is the long-term effects.
Yeah.
Right. And, what we are seeing though is, there is long-term effects for men who watch porn on a regular basis. There is higher incidence of depression and low self-esteem. And there is more of a disconnect that happens between them and their sexual partner, because it's easier to view porn than it is to go and face your partner, where you could be potentially rejected or criticized or judged. Right.
And when you're working through those normal parts of a relationship, because relationships, we come together as wounded people, and we can heal those wounds if we learn how to do that, which is what couple to couple, or couple synergy is. Our program is teaching people how to do that. And instead of there being a healing experience, there's just more and more damage. And the sadness to me is that, we know people who are watching like dads with their daughters, like Game of Thrones and stuff like that. And these girls are teenagers, and our sexuality really comes from our dads. It's if a mother tries to teach either her son or daughter about sexuality, she looks like she's competing with other women or insecure, and it's really written off. But if the dad is like, what, that is not, you're better than that, or you should want more, or, your body is sacred and use it in a sacred way, that's where we'll hear it. And with boys, don't treat women like that. Look at them in a different way. And it's so easy to turn it into things, right? Especially on our phone, and just discard. And you don't know that you're literally you as the person watching are rejecting people. The people on the screen don't know they're being rejected or not. So there's not that true relationship. But in your head, you're sitting there going, not this, not this. And I remember as a young woman, a therapist asked me, what do you look for in a guy? And I was probably 18 years old at the time, and I was really young and insecure. And I said, what do you mean, what do I look for? I look for if he likes me. And like, I didn't have this idea that there's like 900 guys out there just in line and I get to pick and choose. And, relationships are complex, and we're supposed to live in communities of like 100 people where you would really get to know someone, and there would be the whole community revolving around what's appropriate and not appropriate. And if we lived in a tribe of 100 people, we wouldn't ask all the 18-year-old girls to go up by the fire, take their clothes off and dance around. In fact, we would say, if you accidentally walked in on someone who was changing or something, you would look away and say, oh, I'm sorry. And you would know that as a sacredness and an intimacy. And so our intimacy is kind of unfolded and turned inside out, where, we are naked in front of people, but we are not vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
And we are vulnerable with people we don't get naked with. And so all of that is really, really, really confusing.
Yeah, that's powerful. We are naked in front of people that we don't get vulnerable with, and vulnerable in front of people we don't get naked with. I think people don't even understand vulnerability. They don't know how to get vulnerable. They think oversharing too fast is vulnerability. It's amazing when you really start to understand the nuances of intimacy and how we connect as people, and see how much work we all have to do. Let's take a quick break to hear from our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by Amazon Music Unlimited. You can listen to over 70 million songs and thousands of playlists and stations. Plus, you can now stream your favorite podcasts like Last First Date Radio. You can listen to any song, anytime, anywhere, on any of your devices, your smartphone, your tablet, your PC or Mac, Fire TV, and any Alexa-enabled devices like the Amazon Echo. Get Amazon Music Unlimited for free for 30 days. Just head on over to getamazonmusic.com/lastfirstdate to learn more and claim this offer.
I would like to offer some hope.
Yeah.
We're a normal married couple, and we've been on our own journey with these things. And grew up, I grew up before the internet porn thing. VHS was invented when I was somewhere in high school, and you had way more overexposure.
Mm-hmm.
And for men, it's not painful at all. There's no pain involved in watching naked women or watching people have sex. For women, there is one way or the other. You can either join in on that and become more predatory-like, and that will change your brain development, or you go in the opposite direction and become really insecure and judgmental about yourself. And, this is why we see a lot more eating disorders and things like that. But if you allow yourself, if you consciously choose to unplug, which is something we chose a couple of years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's funny, we were watching a show the other day, and we always look to see, all right, what's in this? And the ratings, like one rating said PG-14, and Ray's like, oh, this one's probably fine. And he clicks on it. He's like, no, it's not. And then there was one that's TVMA with nothing in it. And so the ratings don't even help you. You really have to do a little bit of a dive to find out what kind of content is in there. And, they want that content in there because it hijacks you. And it hijacks you in a way that, what Ray was talking about was shame. And that shame then is the thing that drives you to go spend money, go try to get plastic surgery or buy more clothing or whatever is the thing that people are trying to sell. And so it's sort of like if every day all you did was eat McDonald's. And over time, it's delicious when you first eat it, right? Because it's all those chemicals are supposed to taste good. They work really hard at making that happen. But what it does in your body is it breaks it down, and you can't really sustain your life very healthily. You'll get all sorts of problems over time. And pornography is the same way. And so when you do dial it back, if you consciously choose to turn it off and not do those things, and especially electronics in general shrink your gray matter, which is the part of our brain that is connected to relationship. And so we're even talking about off of electronics and desensitize or resensitizing yourself. You are capable of resensitizing yourself and doing the harder work if you detach. And I gotta say, it's a fabulous way to live. And again, I think the hiking brought us back to that because, we did a 20-day hike, no electronics in the mountains with whatever you can carry on your back. And going into the mountains was not shocking, but coming out was shocking because your nervous system just gets bombarded with stuff, even if it's not pornography. And so when you let go of all those things that are shocking you, your nervous system settles down, which is what you need for intimacy. And then you can actually start working on having really incredible bonding, healing sex with your partner.
There are couples out there that would say that, we incorporate porn into our sexual life, and it works for us. It's great. Women will say that I view porn, or men say that we view porn together, and that's fine. And they can say that they have a good sexual life, but we're not talking about it's either good or bad. We're talking about degrees here, and we're talking about being able to hit a point of sexual intimacy that you've never been able to hit before in your entire life, right? And that takes work. As relationships take a lot of work. It's not something that just comes very easily. And so the most intimate act that you can have, both physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual act that you can have with another human being is going to take a lot of work. It's going to take that connection and constant, evolution and vulnerability, as you're saying, right? And yes, people really don't know the extent of vulnerability that is needed in order for a couple to be able to join together and be able to reach those heights.
Yeah, so a lot of couples do watch porn together, and I'm glad you brought that up. So, it's all about the degrees, but it's not a substitute for the work. And I think the hardest thing that people do is to admit that they need work, that they themselves are part of the problem. And I remember after my divorce thinking, well, I worked really hard at this relationship, and so I'm not the one with the issues. And then I started doing work on myself and realized, wait a minute, I picked this person. I stayed 23 years with this person. Why did I make those choices? And why did I stay? Picking, staying, trying to constantly work on something that wasn't working. What part of me needed to grow? And where do I need to do work? And we're always evolving and growing if we're open to it. I think the moment we say we're done, we have no work to do, or the opposite, where it's a lot of people will say, well, I was born this way. I'm damaged from childhood, so nothing I can do about it. I don't have a choice. I'm sure you hear that a lot in your practice.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And, we tell people that, the individual work is absolutely awesome and necessary. Each person has to do their work. But when it comes to working on the relationship, it has to be done together, right? No one person can do more of the work than the other. And it's like running a 3-legged race, and it has to be done in unison, right? And so as couples grow together, as they become more vulnerable with each other, as they are able to heal each other's emotional wounds that they've brought into the relationship from their past, that is when they can actually address intimacy and sex between the two of them as a unifying experience versus something that actually causes more of a wound or deepens some of the wounds that they already have.
One thing that I'd like to share is, on my own personal journey, I, as a young woman, was insecure, and I, fell into all the pitfalls that I think most women do. And you don't know what you don't know. And that's a crazy and brilliant thing to say, right? And so the work that you're doing of helping people become whole in and of themselves. And in my journey, there wasn't a lot of talk about that. And at the age of 27, 28, I had this idea that, whenever I was in a relationship, I felt terrible. I always felt insecure. I felt like, who's lying to me now, and what's going to happen? And then when the relationship would end, I would feel intact and whole and healthy and good. And so at that stage of my life, I was like, I have no business being in a relationship. I couldn't attract a healthy partner to save my life, So I, at that point, kind of committed to like, I'm kind of done, and I spent a good 3 years working on myself and learning how to, those needs that we have, we don't have to get those from one person, but we do have to take responsibility for those needs, just like we take responsibility for our food, clothing, and shelter. And so finding, good friends and hobbies and self-care and ways to become whole. And I'll probably get in trouble for saying this, but I think it is especially important for women, because women are going to be the ones that notice. And that's just the way our biology is, with our sense of our amygdalas and how I have to pay attention to the world because of babies and safety and stuff like that we will notice those issues first. And typically a man will come into doing the work because his fear of losing his person. And so absolutely 100% agree with you that working on yourself is so incredibly important. And most women think that working on the relationship means monitoring him, not letting any of the balls drop, fixing him. And that is it actually just continues the pattern in the cycle.
Yeah. Nobody wants to be manipulated, controlled. No change comes about when somebody's monitoring you like a helicopter.
Right. All it does is sets up a parent-child relationship, and there's a hierarchy, and the one thing that human beings, don't want in their lives is to be controlled by anybody. So there's, going to be the reaction of rebellion. Right. And so, yes, what Jean's talking about, as far as men are typically not going to be the ones that seek change in a relationship. They really are trying to maintain status quo. Right. And that's the goal, is to fix a problem, attack a problem, and then go back to normal and normalcy. Right. But as a relationship changes over time, those little changes, is very hard for men to really notice. And so the disconnect that could happen within a relationship, men are not going to notice it initially. Women are going to notice it a lot more, right? And so as that disconnect happens, what happens for men is that they tend to distract themselves, right? They don't like that uncomfortable feeling of vulnerability, right? And that risk of rejection and abandonment. So they are going to distract themselves from those feelings, like using alcohol, drugs, and porn being one of them.
Yeah, and I see women doing it through shopping and eating and excessive binge watching. I mean, there's so many ways that we can numb ourselves from having to feel without even realizing it. And it's so important to notice whatever we're doing to keep ourselves from vulnerability and from getting closer to others by going inward and just putting a Band-Aid on all those feelings, because they don't go away. They keep popping up. It's crazy. So this is such a fascinating conversation, and there's so many great takeaways of vulnerability and just noticing the effects of pornography, that it's just the numbers, the exposure, all of that is so important to know. So if there is somebody who's listening and they have a porn addiction in that relationship, what is the first step that the couple can take to create more intimacy, to start to heal?
To talk about it.
Yeah.
When we're in pain, we have two choices. We can seek immediate comfort, and anything that brings us immediate comfort is going to be food, alcohol, porn, nothing that it leads to pleasure in that moment, but over time it is unhealthy for us and breaks us down. And the other thing that we can do is seek discipline. And discipline is holding yourself at a place beyond what you feel emotionally and seeing what comes up. And when you stay in discipline, it leads to joy. And so if that sounds like hard work, it is. If it sounds like you have to sit in your pain for a bit, you do. And, nobody is having these conversations. That's the number one thing. We just did a couple intensive weekend, and we did a breakout with the men and women. And we did a deep dive into this talk, and everyone walked away from that like, oh my God, I had no idea. I asked the women, how often are you having sex when you don't want to? 80% of the time is what they were saying. Mm-hmm. And and how much are you talking about what your needs are with your partner? And the biggest problem is people don't know themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing I would love to say is that if you feel shame, it's probably not true. It's probably your truth that someone told you you shouldn't feel. So if you're feeling an insecurity or vulnerability, instead of feeling that you experience that as shame, I shouldn't feel that way. I shouldn't have jealousy. I shouldn't ever have those things. And it's not true. Your truth inside of you is 100% accurate. It's the lies that are on top of it that you have to uncover. It sort of like puts a cloud around our gut feeling. And I would offer that to people that really sit and listen to your gut and find the truth that's in there and then share that with someone, because shame can only have a grip on us if we keep it a secret.
Mm.
These are hard conversations to have, very hard conversations.
Yeah,
I mean, you're
that's
mentioning
so important.
you mentioned the couples weekend intensive. The men had no idea that their partners were feeling that way either. And so if there's anything out there, for people listening, if you feel shame inside about your own sexuality, your partner feels just as much shame as well. And that is the conversation that needs to be had. Most couples aren't talking at all in the bedroom. And so they just continue to do what they've always done and feel the way that they've always felt. And they feel even more distant from each other, right? And so the goal is to connect and to become closer to your partner. The first way to do that is really just to say, I don't like feeling this way anymore, right? And I want to feel something better.
Yeah.
We live in a wonderful world with so many resources.
Yeah. For those that might feel that they have a porn addiction, there is an organization out there called Fight the New Drug. I don't know if it's .org or .com, but it's Fight the New Drug. That is a huge resource for people who are struggling, with viewing too much porn.
There's a really good book the book's called The Truth About Men.
Oh, The Truth About Men by Devon Franklin.
Yeah, where he really talks about that in the Hollywood industry.
And that's specifically, for men to really figure out that piece within themselves of where they're being hijacked and, how to be actually more in control of your life.
Interesting. This is such an important conversation. And I wish people would talk more. I remember at the beginning of my marriage when I just started getting curious with other newlyweds about the frequency of sex. And I was shocked to hear how many people did not have sex regularly and they were having obligation sex. Mm-hmm. Almost everyone. And withholding sex is punishment. And this was like they had just gotten married. Imagine how many of these couples, many of them are divorced today, but some are still together and miserable with each other. Yep. It's just, and it doesn't have to be that way. There's so much beauty to this work. And yes, you do have to sit in your pain. You don't get the extreme joy if you don't experience extreme pain. You have to sit with it. You can't numb on one end and then expect to have something fantastic on the other. So thank you so much for sharing this with us today. I know that many people will get so much from this conversation. It's not just about pornography. It's really about intimacy and how we can really get closer to each other as people, as couples, and live happier lives. So tell our audience how they can find you.
Couplesynergy.com. Couplesynergy.com. That's where you can access, not only our couple-to-couple program where we coach couples, but also our weekend intensive that we hold. We have another one coming up in September. And that's always awesome. We also have an online connections program where people are able to, connect with a lot of the resources that we have. And we also have the podcast as well, as you mentioned earlier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. So we'll have links to all that in the show notes.
Great.
Wonderful.
Thank you for doing the beautiful work you do in the world. I really appreciate it.
Thank you also. I'm looking forward to reading your book.
Oh, thank you. Mm-hmm. And thank you, everybody, for listening. If you love our show, please rate and review us wherever you listen to podcasts. And we hope you go on your last first date very soon.